This experiment was conducted by Jane Elliott, who is a third grade teacher in Iowa. She was inspired to do this experiment the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. She needed to teach her students on racism, prejudice, and discrimination through the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment. It is a divisive exercise based on their eye color, which is a characteristic that people have no control of. Why is to study the cause and effects of discrimination and prejudice to people who face it on daily basis. The very first experiment was conducted on 5th of April 1968, which was a day right after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. 2 years later, in 1970, after catching the public's eyes, the experiment was turned into a documentary called A Class Divided. Following her successful experiment in class with third grade students, she has been invited to carry out the same experiment but with a different crowd of people. One of it is the Green Haven Correctional Facility in Stoneville, New York, which is a maximum security prison involving prison guards. And then she was invited to the infamous Oprah Winfrey Show to experiment on Oprah's audience. The hypothesis is that discrimination is nurtured and does not occur naturally.
Jane Elliott divided third graders into two groups based on their eye color, which was blue-eyed and brown-eyed. On the first day of the experiment, blue-eyed students are thought to be more superior than brown-eyed students. Whereas, brown-eyed students were told to wear colors around their neck as a purpose to be identified as a minority. Jane will tell the class about how blue-eyed individuals are smarter, more disciplined, and better behaved. They were also given privileges such as long recess and second portions at lunch. Meanwhile, the brown-eyed students were unable to play, sit, or associate with the blue-eyed students and were constantly criticized and ridiculed by Jane throughout the day.
Since I'm the teacher and I have blue eyes, I think maybe the blue-eyed people should be on top the first day.
And up here?
The second day, the roles were reversed and the blue-eyed students are now made to feel inferior while the brown-eyed students are now the dominant group.
Prison officials, guards, and parole officers were told to report to the facility for a workshop, without knowing what the workshop was actually about. In this experiment, the blue-eyed group was considered the minority. The brown-eyed group, as the majority, that was given advantages such as entering early to the conference room and given comfortable seats. On the other hand, the group of minority was subjected to subpar conditions such as being forced to wear a band of shame.
The workshop was supposed to begin at 9. They took the brown eyes in about 9 and then left us standing in the hall. I literally stood because there weren't enough chairs and I didn't know whether or not I'd wanted to fight to take a chair down. I didn't know if somebody'd come and take the chair away from me if I did.
Over there, put it on. No, over there. Blue.
What was supposed to be a normal day at the set of the show has taken a turn when the audience were separated into two distinct groups when they arrived on set. When audience lined up to enter the studio, the blue-eyed people were pulled out of the line, told to put on a green collar and wait outside. Meanwhile, the brown-eyed people were told to step to the front of the line. Once indoors, the brown-eyed group was then treated to coffee and donuts, while the blue-eyed group could only stand around and wait with no food for 2 hours. The blue-eyed people were made to feel inferior to the brown-eyed people during the show. Jane Elliott explained what her study had proved, that blue-eyed were clearly less intelligent than to the brown-eyed. It caused a lot of rage, and the audience actually became convinced that Jane Elliott was telling the truth.
The way they treated you, you felt like you didn't even want to try to do anything. It seemed like Mrs. Elliott was taking our best friends away from us.
The blue-eyed students were beginning to perform better in the classroom. Those of non-blue-eyed students who were performing well the day before began to perform poorly in class. The superior groups for each day would also tend to discriminate towards the minority group.
You went faster than I've ever had anyone go through the card pack. Why couldn't you get them yesterday?
We had those collars on.
You think the collars kept you?
just keep thinking about those collars.
Oh.
And my eyes kept getting rolling around.
Oh, and you couldn't think as well with the collars on.
From the experience of feeling like I was in a glass cage and I was powerless, there was a sense of hopelessness. I was angry, I wanted to speak up, and yet at times I knew if I spoke up, I'd be back in a powerless situation. I'd be attacked. A sense of hopelessness.
The blue-eyed prison officials and officers who were considered as minorities showed signs of distractions and despondent. They stumbled over the simplest of commands, but the difference in treatment has created hostility among the two groups.
Just deliberately not put it on your paper. You're being totally unrealistic.
Important to me. I remember saying, I like to know who you're speaking to you when you say you three.
Then what should you do?
Ask you to use my name, which I did.
And where should your name have been?
Right where it is.
On your paper?
And on my birth certificate.
Is it on your paper?
No, ma'am.
Where'd you get a birth certificate?
Same place you got? Out of a slot machine, same as you did, lady.
I think you're probably right about your own.
This is not real life. We were treated
Oh,
completely
wait a minute,
different.
wait a minute. This isn't real life for you.
Well, and
For
number
how many
one,
of you people of color is this real life? I'd like to see your hands.
The Blues began to revolt and try to convince Oprah that they were just as intelligent as the Browns. While the Browns sat by smugly, obviously, beginning to feel superior than the Blues.
Jane does not feel personally any of the things that she has said about blue-eyed people. Do you get that? You want to hear her say that? Oh, you think she does? You think she does? Jane has blue eyes.
They all came to a similar result in which the majority group of each one of these experiments were beginning to feel superior from the other because Jane had allowed them to feel entitled. They were also acting nasty towards those of the minority. Whereas the minority group started to feel devastated and demotivated by the discrimination thrown at them, they started to perform poorly in class and their jobs.
At the end of every experiment, both groups learned that discrimination against minority is real and will develop over time because of our social surroundings. It demonstrates how easily human beings can be taught to discriminate based on arbitrary features. These people are now made to understand what discrimination feels like. Racism is nurtured and does not occur naturally, quoting Elliot Jane. I've watched what have been marvelous, cooperative, wonderful, thoughtful children turn into nasty, vicious, discriminating little third graders in a space of 15 minutes. You cannot be prejudiced against someone just for being different, and that the actions of discrimination hurt individuals and create hostility.